Hi, I'm Sharon King. I'm an instructional designer with Louisiana Community and Technical College System, and I am here with one of our faculty members. This is going to be a course tour to show you some of the, or to show you hopefully all of the 12 quality elements, or at least give you a good presentation of most of them. And so we'll just try to get to this kind of quickly so we can get through it, and I'll turn it over to you, Nina.
Okay, hi, I'm Nina McCune. I'm an assistant professor of history at Baton Rouge Community College, and I've taught online for since 1995, so for a very, very long time. And I was very excited when we made the shift to Canvas because I think Canvas has a greater functionality and I think is much more responsive to what we need to do throughout LCTCS. So I'm just going to get right to it. I want to show one of my courses that I'm teaching online, and this is American History 201. There's a lot that went into putting this course together, and of course, you know, the first thing that you see is this very fancy graphic. But when I went to go move my classes into Canvas, I took the opportunity to actually stop before just importing a bunch of stuff and think a little bit more carefully about what I was going to be putting into this LMS. And that is to say, I stripped the course way back and I thought about what students want to get out of the course and what I want them to get out of the course. And I remembered back to my early pedagogical training when I was reminded that whatever it was that struck my imagination or that made me interested in learning about history is something that I have to inspire in my students. And it's very hard, of course, in an online modality to be all inspiring and all engaging. So I stripped everything back to the outcomes. And I'm going to actually start there. Just quickly looking at what they look like in Canvas once they're entered. And this course has both course level learning outcomes and general education learning outcomes. And so that makes this course a little bit harder because when there are general education learning outcomes involved, most students have to sign up for the course. They're not necessarily lining up out the door. They are required for some degree program. And I completely respect that for my students. But what struck me most about the ability to put in learning outcomes first is I had the opportunity then to really think about what do those learning outcomes mean? How can students incrementally begin to achieve them? What kind of opportunities can I create in this online space that would then allow them to be able to achieve, for example, comprehending a primary source? What does that even mean? And so once I entered all of the outcomes in, I stripped back all of my assignments. And I was thinking, we all learn best in baby steps. And I started to think about Bloom's taxonomy. And luckily, my course level learning outcomes mirror Bloom's taxonomy in a great way. The first basic fundamental part of the taxonomy, of course, is to remember that students should be able to demonstrate a knowledge or an understanding of a certain set of concepts. And my first course level learning outcome is that students should be able to demonstrate knowledge of important historical events. So that can be done with quizzes or tests or fill in the blank items, something along those lines. But then how do I make it interesting, right? That's something that was always clicking in the back of my head. The next task that students have to do is to locate and retrieve data. So that becomes a little bit more cool. What sources are out there that students can start to engage with, especially online, that they can enjoy and get credible research items from? And the last course learning outcome that we have is comprehending a primary source. And of course, this is higher up on the hierarchy of the taxonomy. But once they've been able to kind of go through the steps of seeing how they can find a credible source, what a credible website can look like, how to use the data, you can start to play with the assignments and come up with something imaginative that engages both kind of a fantasy of a world of theirs to pretend that they lived hundreds of years ago, while still using the data and still demonstrating a certain amount of knowledge, whether that's chronological knowledge or geographical knowledge or whatever we're covering at the time. And so for me, that opened up a lot of leeway in terms of what I wanted my students to engage in throughout the term. And so from there, I then, of course, went in and thought about the assignments. And so I'm going to quickly go to the modules of the course.
Hey, Nina, I have one question for you before you move on to that.
Okay.
Your learning outcomes, I know in Canvas that eventually rolls up to some data. How do these outcomes that you are measuring differ from your learning objectives in the course?
They're exactly the same.
Okay.
They're exactly the same. I just took the language verbatim from the master syllabus that we have for the course, and BRCC has published all of its master syllabus online. And so for anyone who teaches the course, they have immediate access to it. And so, yeah, they're absolutely verbatim.
So you are measuring with data every objective that you can go back and look at later to see how you're meeting those.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
And so for multiple reasons, you know, because there's lots of layers to this onion, Canvas is so awesome to work in, because you can define your outcomes and then you can begin to link assignments to those outcomes. And once you do that, Canvas automatically generates assessment data that you could then report to your department or to your division, you know, for institutional effectiveness. And it's all just a couple of clicks and essentially you're done. So it's a really wonderful feature that Canvas has.
Okay, great.
So I divided my course into 3 dominant sections, and that's just for digestibility. And for every chapter in the course, I have a very thematic process that I want the students to go through. So for example, I would have an introductory page for the chapter, whatever the chapter is, and then I would have a couple primary sources. And that's the historian's lifeblood, is learning how to read texts from the past and read multiple texts from a certain time period and start to order them chronologically. And I should point out that everything that I have posted in my course, I make very sure that I have images credited, I have quotes credited. So for example, in the introduction to chapter 16, I give a couple smaller learning objectives, what students should walk away with from this chapter. And then I also cite the sources where I got these images. This is a fantastic opportunity to model for our students what we mean by cite your sources, or be able to show me where you got your data from. And so the pattern is the same for every chapter, and I think consistency in online learning especially is very important, so a student begins to inculcate the learning environment and what to expect from it. And so my dog seconds that.
He agrees.
For some reason, Nat Turner's Rebellion is not pulling up right now, but it would be a primary source that would be cited. And then this moves into an invitation for students to explore the web, to think about plantation life. If there was a man by the name of Nat Turner all those many years ago who lived in such a manner, can you imagine that, right? So I try to engage the imagination all the time in the course. And I offer links that I think would be good for students to explore, and offer them the opportunity to either email me individually so we can have a one-on-one discourse about whatever they're thinking, or I would open it up to a broader discussion forum. I try to always include extras in the course, some videos. Google offered these guys a lot of money to create awesome videos, and I think they do it for a lot of different disciplines. For chemistry and biology and psychology and for history, there's this crash course series that's freely available on YouTube. And so, have you heard of that, Sharon?
I have.
Do you know, is it more than just those disciplines?
Well, I'm not that familiar with it. The one that I have heard it is with history.
Oh, okay. Well, they're awesome. They're kind of, I think students like them because they're kind of funny and they're kind of jokey, but they do a great point at highlighting the most important or salient features of a period. But all I'm getting at with this is I like to offer in an online environment so much opportunity, and it's optional. All of this is optional, and I understand there might be students who never look at it, which would break my heart, but most students do engage with it at some point. By this point in every module, I assume the student has read the book, they've looked at a lecture, and they've done something to familiarize themselves with what the most important features are of the chapter. And I always offer a practice quiz. I think the more practice opportunities you give a student, the better. It's that repetition and that trial and error. And this is a free space in the course that they can come on, take this quiz as many times as they want before they get to the real deal, which would be the next part. And I'm sorry, this is actually, I just realizing this isn't an online course at all. This is one of my face-to-face courses. They're structured pretty well the same way. And in Canvas, every time you have something that you measure, you have to have an assignment or a quiz for it. And so, for example, for attendance and participation, and this would be for class meeting 22, you have to have some kind of an assignment. Since the students can see it, I just like to let them know what I'm looking at. This is the overview, that this is just, they don't have to do anything here. This is just a placeholder. The time commitment, any assignment is going to require of them, as well as instructions. Sorry about that. And so as we go on, then there's going to be a number of assignments, but again, I just like to keep that repetition going so that there's similarity throughout each and every chapter. Students would end up with some kind of a quiz or some kind of a project to do, and that would round out the chapter. But consistency and clarity is very, very important, I think, in anything you put online for students.
Okay. And so when you give an exam or a quiz, how do you worry about academic honesty, academic integrity? I know that I have new to online teachers always have that question, how do I keep them from cheating?
I think that's a great question, especially for larger exams, and I'm going to pull up a truly online course this time. For larger exams like a final and or a midterm, BRCC has engaged the services of ProctorU. Mm-hmm. And so for that, and actually I can just pull it up here on the sidebar, for that, each instructor has to have an account and then students develop an account. And that's a service then that students would have to have a web camera, and they would have to log in through ProctorU, and BRCC has made it available through Canvas. There are other options as well, and so if we go to quizzes and make a new quiz, there's an opportunity to use what's called Respondus Lockdown Browser, and that makes it virtually impossible for a student. They don't have to pay any extra money for this, but it makes it very difficult for a student to navigate on the web while they have a quiz in Respondus Lockdown Browser. And so you would choose that through here. There's also quiz restrictions that you can put on quizzes requiring an access code. You can monitor their IP address to make sure that there's a consistency. If you notice for 3 weeks in a row, student X has been doing horribly, and then all of a sudden they're doing really, really great, you can go back and look at different IP addresses. That student hasn't farmed it out to someone on the web who sells those services. And if we're honest about this, SACS requires really only having a username and a password. And for SACS, that's adequate. And there's all sorts of extra stuff you can do, like using a service like Proctor, and that's a fee-based service that students pay a different amount to take a test based on the length of the test. BRCC also has a testing center where students can go in person and then sit in a space in the library and take an exam, or you can use something, like I said, like Respondus Lockdown Browser. And ultimately, I think we don't know, right? I don't think we can really truly know, and we have to just pay close attention to what our students are producing.
Do you find, because you teach face-to-face and, well, I guess hybrid is really more what you would call yours, and fully online, do you find that either one is easier for you to tell a student's progress? I know I've heard online teachers say, actually, I can pretty much see how a student is progressing, so if something's out of line, it's easy for me to tell.
Yeah, I think so. I think both are, for me, especially using Canvas, both modalities are fairly easy to monitor. One thing I do keep a very close eye on in the grade book, in addition to kind of keeping mental notes and going back and looking at rubric results of student written work and just keeping track of what's going on in the grade book, is I use the Learning Mastery grade book an awful lot. That offers a pictograph representation of how the students are achieving the course level learning outcomes or the general education learning outcomes. And so you can visually immediately begin to identify trends. There's in quizzes, for example, student analysis buttons that you can use in Canvas as well, that again generate a number of graphs or images that measure student response rates. I find those helpful if there's ever a question. Yeah. And if there is ever any academic dishonesty, there are other options, and I don't think BRCC has fully integrated this yet within Canvas, but there are plagiarism checkers like Turnitin, or I encourage students to submit their work through a free online service like Check My Paper, and then they can email me or upload the results from Check My Paper, for example, just to kind of keep us all on task and on level.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you want me to keep talking about the course, or?
Yes, please.
Okay. So again, I'm not going to lie. These courses took me an awful lot of work to put together because I want them to be engaging. I want them, even for the general education student who keeps on wondering, why am I in this course? I want assignments to make sense, because ultimately I'm hoping that I'm teaching transferable skills. Being able to locate credible data, or being able to make sense out of a number of different perspectives, I think is valuable in any profession that these students might go into. And I also want it to be a pleasing environment. And so I have, for example, made this front page to be reflective of the themes of the course, the spirit of the course, if you will.
Would you mind, Nina, showing the student view?
Sure, not a problem. Oops, I have to go to settings to do this.
Just to get a feel for what they actually see.
Oh, that's a good point. So when a student logs into the course, they will see something like this. It's the buttons that I grayed out, for example, are absent. They have a check-in list of what's coming due. Then they have what's coming up, for example, until the end of the course. And then they have this kind of middle space here where Lady Liberty is sowing seeds for victory. And again, I've made a note of where I found this image. And I've modified this clearly. I got the picture from the internet, right? And I give I hyperlinked to the URL where I found it at the Library of Congress. And then I went in and I just added language on top of it. History 202, American History from 1865.
Now you did that in what, Photoshop or a different?
I did this in Photoshop.
Okay.
And then for these buttons, I just cut out the background to make a little square. And again, I just put words over it and saved all of these as individual pictures. And then once I got the larger front piece up, I made a table underneath, and I just put a JPEG per table, and then I hyperlinked it to a Start Here space. And this Start Here is really more of a frequently asked questions site. When we used to have Blackboard, it was so unclear, right? That's a different management system, and you log in and you're like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And I think Canvas is much cleaner and much more accessible in that sense. So, but as kind of archive, if you will, I've kept the Start Here page, and so I have big, broad questions. You know, how does the course work? What book do I need? And these are all hyperlinked questions then that go to the appropriate answer.
Well, and I would like to point out, can we go back to that?
Sure.
You know, one of the things in what we're trying to do with the system is to focus on 12 different quality elements. And I'm looking at this page, and one of them is the navigation of the course, which you're addressing under structure of the course. And then another is how do I earn points? And so it's posting the grading policy, which is one of the things that we want to, you know, make sure is posted really clearly. And then also, where do I go for technical assistance? And you've got that on this front page as well.
Absolutely. And that's something, again, that I think Canvas is fantastic with. If a school doesn't have like a large IT department that they can have a standalone service, BRCC is very lucky. We have really awesome people that can help with that. But Canvas itself has that little help feature up in the right-hand corner of the screen, right here, that you can have an instant chat with someone, and they're very responsive, and I think 9 times out of 10 incredibly helpful. So I know just from a technological standpoint, I've noticed this semester students are much more responsive to Canvas rather than the kind of eye roll, oh my God, it's Blackboard and I don't know what to do.
That's great to hear.
Yeah, I still can't find it. It's been a really wonderful experience in Canvas's terms. So I'm thrilled. I really am. But I agree with you. I think it's crucial to repeat and repeat in several places in the course how students can do well. You know, because ultimately they are paying money. They want to earn a good grade, and I want them to feel that they have access to all the information that they need. And so I've gone overboard. I will admit it. I have links for, you know, the kinds of assignments that we have in this class. And apparently this page has been disabled for this course, so that's interesting. It's in the introduction. I'm not quite sure why it just did that, but it just did that.
Where do you post like your communication policy and like welcome video, or do you do a welcome video in a high?
We do, absolutely. So we can go to modules, and I have a very extensive introduction to the course.
Oh, okay.
And it includes things like welcome to History 202, but I should say before they get into Canvas, I message them using either, you know, the emails that are on Lola, or the emails that are already in Canvas, and I message them what to expect when they first log into the course. And it's a screenshot of the front page, and I hyperlink where they should go get the book. And so they get kind of a preview before they even get into the course. But then for the introduction, I have a welcome to the 202. How do I get started in this online course? I'm just going to click through these very quickly. And I have a little video that I've made and I posted to YouTube on how to get started. Hopefully it's a little it's kind of corny, I'll admit. I want to motivate them. I include a picture of the book that we use, and I hyperlink to the BRCC bookstore and to the publisher. You know, students can really buy the book where they want. We prefer it, of course, and if they have vouchers, they need to go through the bookstore. But students, of course, are going to try to find it for as inexpensively as possible. But I go through as much information as I can, and I embed videos from Canvas as well to get them oriented and to get them feeling like can do this, right? That they can handle this. And I have a few little assignments. I have extra introductory videos about they need to do and why they should be taking this class. How much time should I spend on this course every week? This is the how do I earn points, how will I be graded? And I have embedded a video then on student grades, just so that they can understand how to read the grade book. And
one question I've had, Nina, and maybe you can help me understand, is because on QM, from what I understand, they want you to post things like the communication policy, these sort of things separately, but they also belong on the syllabus.
Yes.
So I've had teachers say, well, if I've got it posted on the syllabus, do I really need a separate section? And can you expand on that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think the more places that you post information, the better. I think a successful online course has a lot of redundancy built into it, because sometimes when we include so much information in our syllabus, the syllabus is impossible to read. It gets to be about 50 pages long, right? It has all the elements.
Right.
It's too dense, and it's not as user-friendly as setting up something like, for example, this page, how do I get in touch with my instructor? And I'm a firm believer in having, if at the sake of repeating myself, just having the information so readily accessible that it is redundant. And I think it helps because, you know, a student will more likely remember this page in the introduction than they would like, oh yeah, that's on page 6 of the syllabus. Or I also have an online syllabus. I have it, you know, so that they can print it out. But I also have transferred it to something that's online. And I have anchors in this document that they can go to part 1, part 2, or part 3.
Okay.
But when we get to part 2, for example, you can see it's long.
Yeah.
Scroll through this is I think really frustrating for a student. This is then part 3 where the course calendar is, and I always give them the option that they can download copies of anything here if they want to save them to their desktop, or if they want to print them up, that they should. But this is a lot. So the easier that I can chunk it, I think that makes it a little bit more friendly for them to use as well.
And how have you done do you have an introductory video for yourself as a teacher?
I actually don't. I flat out just have a written introduction.
Oh, okay, but you have one. Yeah.
In the discussion forums.
I see.
I'm always camera shy.
No way.
But one thing else that I'd like to point out, because of the quality checklist, is another thing I spent way too much time on, is I made a little map of resources. Again, a SACS requirement is that a college offers the same set of resources for every campus that they have, including online. And so BRCC has multiple campuses throughout the Baton Rouge area, and I believe even as far as Plaquemine Parish and a couple other parishes. But in the online environment, you know, it's hard to know where to go, and it's hard to know who to turn to. So I took a map of Baton Rouge Community College, and I showed the physical location of, for example, the Academic Learning Center, but then I also have hyperlinks to it. So students can get online tutoring, and that again is in part to meet the SACS requirement. Students can search the Magnolia Library online. They also, you know, they have a lot of online resources. And so I try to make the whole campus as accessible as possible to the students as well. And of course, if they can't see this, because on some screens this might turn out weird, I give them alternate ways to view information. And I should also mention, in terms of alternate views, all of the information and all of the images that I have up have the appropriate alternate tags, so they're all ADA compliant. A screen reader could read this information to a student, or it's accessible, in other words.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, obviously, you have a beautiful course here,
Oh,
and,
thank you.
and if I'm a new to online teacher, I'm looking at this going, oh my gosh, I don't know. You know, this is like so far beyond what I could do. But what have you learned? What's been the most valuable things that you have learned throughout your many years of teaching online that have changed the way that you design your course?
Um, Honestly, is being really careful with your assignments. Make sure that whatever you ask your students to do, that you give them the tools online to do it. Because you know, sometimes something works really well face to face, and it doesn't translate immediately to an online or even to a hybrid environment. And so, in that sense, keep your course level learning outcomes close to your heart. And make sure that what you are asking is measurable and achievable given where you're at in the course. And that's something I think as instructors we learn anew every semester. So there's really no one magical thing, but like I said, when we moved to Canvas, I really embraced the opportunity to rework all of the assignments and pay such close attention to that. And it's been awesome. The students have told me that they really enjoy the assignments, and that doesn't mean that they're perfect, but they seem to really enjoy them. They engage with them. The things that they're producing are really awesome, and I'm very impressed with how they've responded to the interaction online.
Okay. Great. Now, speaking of interaction, I guess that's another question. One of the things that is a big fear for new to online teachers is that they're going to lose that connection that they have with students face to face. And for many of them, that's why they got into teaching, because they love that connection. What things do you do and that you feel are the most important things to do to keep that connection going?
Well, of course, first is to establish it. And I know that sounds silly, but I do a couple of things in the online courses. In the introduction module, I have them get in touch with me, send me an email, so that way they know how to either message me in Canvas or they can email me, and I respond to them right away. And if you have a lot of students, this is kind of burdensome at the beginning of the term, but I think it's important that you have that immediate one-on-one kind of private communication with your students. And then I also have a Let's Meet discussion board where they get to meet the rest of their classmates and they get to introduce themselves and engage them in that. And what I've done is very old school in a little notebook, printed out the roster, and then I jotted down things like this student said that they were a Katrina refugee. Right? And so that might be relevant at some point in the course, or, if something else happens just statewide and the student disappears, I can be sensitive to the fact, oh, well, that student might be dealing with some family issues or moving somewhere or, something along those lines. So it requires a little bit more legwork, I think, in the online environment to keep track of who your students are, what their interests are, and then just pay close attention to their work. And again, interact with them. I think for all of the assignments, you can have all the rubrics in the world, but students really value one-on-one feedback. And that is a spectacular thing, again, in Canvas. It's so easy to do that when you go to grade work, there is, if you have rubrics linked up, you can, of course, just click away on a rubric. But there are multiple ways to immediately leave feedback for students. You can type something in the text box, or you can upload a comment that you say, it will record that, or you can even attach a file or a video if you want. And so I think on that level of interaction, because it's addressing multiple ways of hearing and seeing information, and then always ending with, please email me with any questions or call my office if you have any questions. I think that helps to remain active with the students. And I try to create an environment where these discussions don't stop. That yes, you have to have a discussion forum posted by X date, but that doesn't mean that the topic is going to stop. So even amongst themselves, I try very hard to create kind of a community, and I encourage study groups and collaboration along those lines as well.
Have you used the group?
Class.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not. It really depends on the dynamics of the class and how much time they're willing to put in.
Yeah. Have you used web conferences or groups in Canvas with your courses?
Yeah, I've used some groups and they've been pretty successful. I have not yet ventured into web conferencing, but I think that could be awesome.
Because in the group interface, they actually can do their own web conferences with each other.
Right.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I haven't found anybody that's actually done it yet, but I may have to give it a try in my next course just so I can have an example of it.
Well, maybe I'll make it a goal of mine next term.
There you go. There you go. And then you can tell us how it goes.
Exactly.
Well, are there any other things that you would tell a new to online teacher?
Be patient. Be patient with yourself. You will make mistakes. I still make mistakes. I'm not saying it to discourage you. Always try to be as specific as possible in what you post and realize there are still going to be students who don't understand what you want. So always be prepared, take a deep breath, and be responsive. I think the sooner you can respond to a student with a question, especially if they ask you to please clarify something, the better. BRCC has a policy that anyone teaching online has to respond within 48 hours. And I found that within Canvas, I'm usually responding within a couple hours if I'm online.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to minimize the time that it would take for a response then.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your work and your thoughts.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, thank you. And don't hang up. I'm just going to stop.